granted building control and planning approvals. Do they have any financial stake in the project?
What they do have is this image over here. So I don't know if you know Finchley Central very well.
Not that side of Barnet. No, my background is Hendon more.
Ah, right. Okay. Well, in this area over here, there's a Tesco's, and effectively what Barnet is looking to do is to try and improve this area substantially. So they don't have a financial stake in the project per se. Of course, there are the Section 106 contributions as well as CIL that is paid, that being the Community Infrastructure Levy. However, there are road improvements over here, which the scheme which I'm working on will also be sort of continuing into this area to ensure that there's cohesive public realm, if you like.
Understood.
The main engineering issues you considered at the beginning of the scheme?
So there were so effectively a section of this part of the site over here, and a part of the site down here which involved a low-rise news development. The scheme was on an embankment, and it was next to the railway. So there were obvious geotechnical issues as well as issues involving the operational safety of the railway.
What were they?
So things like being able to have openable windows toward the side of the railway, which was a difficult concept because you have an overheating issue, which obviously means that you can alleviate that by opening the windows. But
this would have been the windows in the new flats.
Absolutely, yes. And
what about in terms of what were your concerns about the actual embankment and the asset protection issues?
So concerns mainly had to do with ensuring that the operations of the railway were unaffected. So things such as possibly causing any rotations in the railway, which could have an adverse effect on the operation of the trains, or any vibrations which might cause minor movements in the railway, again affecting its operation. I'd say.
What work was planned to determine that?
You mean in terms of how we plan to ensure that right? Okay. So the way this was done, and if I can go back to this slide over here, this supervisor which was involved was there also from as a kind of a connection to the TfL's asset protection team, which effectively under legislation which is called the ROGS, which is Railway and Other Guided Transport Systems. TfL has a duty to collaborate with developers and other bodies who are working around the railway to ensure that these adverse effects don't occur around the railway. And there are specific risk assessments which need to be executed, as well as requirements. And that is where I liaised quite in depth with that department of TfL to ensure that works which I was looking to do were going to be executed appropriate. However,
so what risks could you have introduced to the operational railway?
I beg your pardon, the risks.
What type of risks operational railway? So you mentioned you wanted somebody with earth experience in particular. So were you looking at rebuilding earthworks or introducing new failure modes, engineering issues around the earthworks that gave you concern?
The ones which I was most concerned about was vibrations and excavations which would result in vertical and lateral deformations in the area upon which the railway was located. However, I must say that due to the early stage of this project, that engagement was limited to an extent because the enabling works didn't involve incredibly heavy engineering activities.
So, just as far as the scope of the enabling works, was this just sort of site clearance and site preparation, but did it involve foundation works for the development?
No, it doesn't.
Were they defined? Had they been defined or determined in some way what the foundations would be?
The foundations at this stage were only conceptual and they were piles. But the enabling works themselves looked at site security, site clearance, moving of cables which were there next to the railway. Yeah.
What generally were the ground conditions there?
check the boreholes. I did have a look at them, but there's a substantial amount of glacial, well, mid-ground glacial till, and I remember there being several other layers. I don't quite remember which ones they were, but under that, of course, is Landing Bay, sand and chalk.
But do you not think that if you're looking at the interface with the railway, for example, not only should you be considering the effects of the development on the railway, but perhaps the effects of the railway and the vibrations from the railway on the development itself? Would not the whole concept of the development have taken that into account at this stage?
So it had, in terms of it carrying out vibration monitoring, which had been undertaken prior to my time. However, additional exercises to determine, say, the frequency of the buildings and the effect that this would have on residents had yet to be designed in detail.
What effects were anticipated on the residents' mission?
Well, I mean, of course, it would be a breach of the sort of limit state where vibrations would be substantial enough to cause discomfort to the residents. That was one from a vibration perspective. Then the other.
Would that have been ground vibration into the foundations and through the?
I believe that that would be the most reasonable way for the vibration to enter the building.
The railway here is, I presume, the Northern Line, is it?
It is, yeah.
Right. There's no national rail in tracks in this area.
No, not to my knowledge.
Okay. It's a little early, normally in the interview, to be asking this, but your work on this seems to be much more involved with property management. Do you see yourself? It's a little curious, even to think that a civil engineer will be getting so involved in this asset protection and property management side of TfL's work, rather than, say, the heavy engineering, civil engineering. Do you see yourself as changing your direction of your career?
I wouldn't say that. Actually, TfL are looking to add more engineers into its property development department. We're quite distinctly different from the property management team. So we do not look after the long-term operation of the buildings. What my team look after is planning applications, delivery, and design. So I would say that I'm an engineer within, of course, surrounded by more, say, planners and building surveyors than I am engineers. However, I think being an engineer in this situation is incredibly useful for TfL, as I'm able to foresee and understand a lot more of the issues than other colleagues due to my educational background as well as my professional background. And
yet, from what you've been saying, your knowledge or your awareness of what was of the engineering side of what was following on from the enabling works